I think Cesaro could have been a fascinating promo if he was given the chance to do that in WWE. He wasn't. And that's our fault. That is a major fumble. That was a crime, a tremendously wasted opportunity. And no one for us to blame but ourselves, including me.
Paul Heyman has managed Brock Lesnar, he's managed CM Punk, he's managed Roman Reigns. Every single one of them left WWE, or is still there, as a world champion. But there was one Paul Heyman guy who never got there. And in a recent interview, Heyman finally said the quiet part out loud. WWE didn't just miss on Cesaro's push. According to Heyman himself, it was never really designed to work in the first place. That's not a fan's theory. That's the manager telling you on the record exactly how the sausage got made. And once you hear it, it's hard to watch Cesaro's WWE run the same way again. So here's the real question. Did Cesaro have some invisible flaw that kept him off the main event scene for over a decade? Or did WWE simply never intend to let him get there and use him for something else entirely? By the end of this, you'll have heard Heyman's own explanation, and you'll probably agree. This wasn't a case of missing talent. This was a case of missing intention. To understand how this happened, you have to go back before WWE even entered the picture. Before he was Cesaro, he was Claudio Castagnoli, a Swiss wrestler who spent years building his name across Europe in promotions that demanded real, stiff, technical wrestling over anything manufactured. He crossed over to America and made a name for himself in Ring of Honor, then traveled to Japan to wrestle for Pro Wrestling Noah, a company respected around the world for producing some of the toughest, most credible in-ring performers alive. Alongside Chris Hero, he formed Kings of Wrestling, a tag team that hardcore fans still consider one of the greatest outside the WWE system entirely. By the time WWE finally signed him in 2011, he already carried a reputation inside the industry as one of the strongest, most technically gifted wrestlers on the planet. Nobody yet knew whether WWE would actually let that reputation translate into a real push, or whether it would simply be absorbed into the machine like so many talents before him. Has Antonio Cesaro? His early run in WWE made that outside reputation obvious almost immediately. He debuted alongside Aksana and captured the United States Championship before long, using a finishing move called the Neutralizer that looked every bit as devastating as anything else on the roster at the time. But it was a much simpler move, the giant swing, that truly caught fire with audiences, spinning helpless opponents in circles again and again until entire arenas lost their minds counting along. Fans watching at home realized quickly that this wasn't a typical WWE athlete working a typical WWE style built around choreography and spectacle. This was something rarer and more legitimate, a genuine feat of strength happening in real time, and the buzz around him kept building in a way that suggested something much bigger was coming for his career. That buzz reached its peak at WrestleMania 30, inside the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. Cesaro eliminated Big Show in a moment nobody in the building expected to actually happen, physically hoisting a nearly 7-foot, 350-pound man over his head and throwing him over the top rope like he weighed nothing at all. The reaction that followed was one of the loudest of the entire night, the exact kind of organic crowd response companies typically build entire pushes around. It looked in that single moment like the birth of WWE's next main event powerhouse, a star the promotion could build around for the next 10 years. Fans were convinced they had just watched the true beginning of something enormous. Instead, that night marked the last simple, uncomplicated high point his career would have for a very long time. Shortly after WrestleMania, Cesaro was paired with Paul Heyman as his new on-screen manager, and fans reacted instantly, calling him the next Brock Lesnar in the making. Heyman himself has since admitted he genuinely believed in the pairing at the time, describing Cesaro as vastly undernoticed and underappreciated by WWE's own management. He went even further in later interviews, calling Cesaro a square peg the company kept trying to force into a round hole, arguing that WWE kept building an artificial manufactured character around him instead of simply highlighting the real, legitimate skills that made him special in the first place. For a moment, it genuinely looked like the push fans had been waiting years for had finally arrived, with the best talker in the business standing right next to him. The truth behind that pairing, as Heyman would only reveal much later, was far more complicated and far less flattering than anyone realized at the time. According to Heyman's own account, the partnership was never really designed to elevate Cesaro at all. Brock Lesnar was away from WWE television during that stretch, having just ended The Undertaker's undefeated WrestleMania streak in one of the most shocking moments in company history. And WWE still needed Heyman speaking on camera every single week to keep that historic moment alive in fans' minds, while Brock stayed home. Cesaro, in effect, became the reason to keep Heyman relevant and on screen, while the real prize of the storyline sat on the shelf. The partnership existed to protect Brock's legacy, not to build Cesaro's career. And that single admission reframes almost everything fans believed about that entire era of his supposed push. What looked like an opportunity was, by Heyman's own description, closer to a placeholder. Heyman didn't stop there. He later admitted there was never a genuine long-term plan behind the pairing to begin with. No real roadmap designed to build Cesaro into a permanent top-tier star, regardless of what happened with Brock. The moment Brock Lesnar returned to WWE television, Cesaro lost his manager almost overnight, and whatever momentum had built up around him evaporated just as quickly as it had arrived. Reflecting on it years afterward, Heyman said that neither Curtis Axel nor Cesaro were ever given an authentic main event plan during that stretch of WWE programming, and he called it, in his own words, a missed opportunity the company let slip through its fingers. Coming from the man who engineered some of wrestling's most successful and calculated pushes, that kind of admission carries real weight, and it's about as close to a confession as fans were ever going to get. Vince McMahon added his own chapter to the story in 2014, appearing on The Steve Austin Show and addressing Cesaro directly and publicly. He questioned his charisma, his personality, and whether he genuinely had what it took to grab what McMahon famously called the brass ring, the intangible quality separating stars from everyone else. Rather than motivating him, the comments seemed to publicly damage momentum that was already fragile, giving critics and skeptics a talking point that followed Cesaro for years afterward. Fans spent years debating whether Vince ever truly believed in him as a legitimate main event star, or whether those comments were simply an excuse dressed up as feedback. Cesaro responded the only way he really knew how, by continuing to perform at an elite level inside the ring night after night, eventually capturing the tag team titles alongside Tyson Kidd and proving once again, in the only language WWE seemed to respect, that the talent had never actually been the problem. What followed was a pattern that repeated itself almost every single time real momentum started to build around him. His team with Tyson Kidd had genuine chemistry and real tag title success, right up until a serious injury to Kidd ended that run abruptly and without warning. He then formed The Bar alongside Sheamus, one of the most respected and decorated tag teams WWE produced that entire decade. But instead of using that success as a launching pad into a singles main event run, he found himself parked back in tag team wrestling once again, seemingly by default. Fans responded to all of it by creating the Cesaro section, a genuine grassroots fan movement that made his popularity impossible for the company to ignore inside arenas week after week. And yet, at WrestleMania Backlash in 2021, when he finally received his first real-world title opportunity against Roman Reigns, he lost, and no sustained singles push of any kind ever followed that match. Critics have long argued that Cesaro simply wasn't a strong enough talker to justify a true main event spot, that promos were the missing piece holding him back from the very top. But Heyman has consistently and firmly rejected that entire narrative in every interview where the subject comes up. He's argued that Cesaro never needed to become someone he naturally wasn't in the first place to succeed at the highest level. Cesaro speaks multiple languages fluently and always preferred letting his in-ring performance do the talking, instead of forced, manufactured promos that didn't fit his personality. Heyman believed a manager's real job in that situation was to amplify those existing strengths rather than erase them entirely in favor of a generic template, forcing him into an unnatural mold. In Heyman's own view, only buried what actually made him worth watching in the first place, and that fundamental disagreement is exactly why fans remain divided to this day over what truly held his career back. In 2022, his WWE contract finally expired, and for the first time in over a decade, he chose not to re-sign with the only major wrestling company he'd ever known in America. He left under his real name, Claudio Castagnoli, closing the book on the Cesaro character entirely, and shortly after he debuted in AEW, where he went on to win the ROH World Championship in his very first year. It was proof, conclusive and undeniable, that his in-ring ability had never actually declined during all those years in WWE. It was a quiet but pointed reminder that the talent had been there the entire time, every single year he spent inside a WWE ring, performing at a level few others could match. What had always been missing wasn't ability, and it was never really promos either. It was a company that was ever actually willing to commit to a real sustained plan. Cesaro spent more than a decade proving, night after night, that he could hang with absolutely anyone inside that ring, and in the end, that still wasn't enough to get him to the very top of WWE. The single biggest opportunity of his entire career arrived the night Paul Heyman stood beside him after WrestleMania 30, and ironically, according to Heyman himself, that moment was never really about Cesaro at all. It was about protecting Brock Lesnar's legacy while he stayed away from television, using Cesaro as the vehicle to keep that story alive in fans' minds until Brock was ready to return. Perhaps that's the real tragedy hiding underneath Cesaro's entire WWE run, the part that took Heyman himself years to admit out loud. He wasn't held back by a lack of talent inside the ring, not for a single day of his career. He was held back because the company that employed him for 11 years never truly decided he would be the next guy.